You ever get one of those texts that makes your stomach drop before you even finish reading it? Like your body knows it's bad news before your brain catches up? That was me on a random Monday afternoon, sitting in the parking lot outside a Home Depot in a town I'm not going to name, staring at my phone while the sun baked through the windshield. The text was from my neighbor, Eli. Not dramatic, not the gossip type, just 3 sentences. Hey man, you need to get home. Dana is inside your garage. She says she's conducting an inspection. And just like that, my peaceful little corner of suburbia turned into a crime scene. Now let me explain something. My garage isn't just a place where I park a car and toss old paint cans. It's my sanctuary. It's where I decompress, where I rebuild engines when I'm stressed, where I polish chrome when the world feels loud. I live in a neighborhood run by an HOA, Maple Ridge Estates, real picturesque, neat lawns, beige houses lined up like obedient soldiers. And at the center of that beige empire sits Dana Caldwell. Early 50s, sharp bob haircut, permanently pressed slacks, clipboard practically glued to her hand. She wasn't technically the HOA president, but she acted like she'd been elected mayor of the zip code. Dana loved rules. Not the spirit of them, the control of them. There's a difference. As I drove home, my mind was racing. How did she get in? I never gave her a key. The garage side door was always locked. The main door only opens with my remote. My pulse was pounding in my ears, not just because someone was trespassing, but because of what that space meant to me. It wasn't clutter. It wasn't junk. It was years of work, thousands of hours, every spare dollar I didn't spend on vacations or fancy dinners. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw it immediately. My garage door was halfway open. Not all the way, just enough to make it feel wrong. Like someone had peeled back the lid of something private. I stepped out of the truck slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. And there she was, Dana, standing inside my garage like she owned the deed. Hands on her hips, clipboard tucked against her chest, face tight with self-importance. "Oh good," she said when she saw me, like I'd just arrived late to a meeting she scheduled. "You're here." I'm documenting several violations. Violations. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just stared at her for a second, letting the audacity settle. "Dana," I said, real calm. "How did you get into my garage?" She waved a hand like I'd asked something trivial. The side door was unsecured. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. Which meant she either forced it, or she tried the handle until something gave. That detail sat heavy in my chest. "I'm authorized to ensure community compliance," she continued, flipping a page on her clipboard. "There are items in here that are not consistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards." Neighborhood aesthetic standards. I walked past her without another word and hit the garage door opener. The whole thing rolled up slowly, sunlight pouring in, illuminating every inch of what she had apparently not been prepared to see in full. Because what she expected, what she wanted, was chaos. A messy bachelor garage. Something she could label as unsightly. Something she could weaponize. Instead, she got a museum. My garage was spotless. Epoxy-coated floors so clean you could see reflections in them. LED strip lighting installed overhead, casting a clean white glow over everything. Against the left wall, 3 vintage motorcycles, restored down to factory spec, chrome polished to mirror shine. A 1969 Triumph Bonneville, a 72 Honda CB750, and a 58 Harley Panhead I rebuilt from a rusted frame. On the right side, 2 classic cars, both under custom-fitted covers I slowly pulled back one by one. A midnight blue 65 Mustang Fastback. A cherry red 67 Corvette Stingray. The air smelled faintly of oil and leather, not neglect. Precision, not disorder. And along the back wall, glass display cases. Carefully arranged collectible figures. Mint-condition first edition comic books sealed in protective slabs. Vintage racing memorabilia signed by drivers most people my age only know from documentaries. Every shelf labeled. Every item cataloged. Dana's posture changed. The confidence drained out of her face in real time. She blinked, then blinked again. Her lips parted slightly, like her brain was trying to reconcile the narrative she'd built about me with the reality standing in front of her. This is excessive," she stammered. "Excessive." She took a step backward, heel catching slightly on the pristine floor. "These vehicles take up significant square footage. And these displays," she gestured vaguely at the cases, "they're commercial in appearance." Commercial. I folded my arms. It's a private garage, Dana. On private property. She swallowed. Her face had gone pale, not because she was impressed, but because her leverage had evaporated. She wasn't standing in front of a violation. She was standing in front of competence, investment, discipline, and worst of all for her, something she couldn't control. Her voice cracked just a little. The board will need to review this. The board, I said slowly, doesn't have jurisdiction inside my garage. And that's when something unexpected happened. She swayed. Actually swayed. Like the emotional whiplash hit her physically. She grabbed the edge of one of the workbenches for balance. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a hollow slap. For a split second I thought she was faking it for drama. But no. Her whole body seemed to shut down under the weight of being wrong. She sank down onto the epoxy floor. Not gracefully, not strategically, just collapsed. And there I stood, looking down at the self-appointed enforcer of Maple Ridge Estates, sitting on my pristine garage floor in stunned silence, surrounded by chrome and glass and proof that sometimes the story people tell themselves about you says more about them than it ever did about you. All right, that's the moment everything shifted. Now let's pause the movie for a second, because what happened in my garage that day wasn't just neighborhood drama. It was a textbook example of how HOAs and human psychology collide. According to standard procedure, an HOA board cannot just enter a homeowner's property whenever they feel like it. They can enforce visible violations, sure, things like lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, structural changes that affect the community. But entry into a private garage, especially without notice, without consent, without a documented emergency, that's not enforcement. That's trespassing. Most state statutes are very clear about that line. From a legal perspective, HOA authority almost always stops at what is externally visible. Inside your home or your closed garage. That's your domain. Period. The moment Dana crossed that threshold, clipboard in hand, she stepped out of community compliance territory and into liability territory. But here's the more interesting part. This is a psychological trap. When someone builds their identity around authority, even small authority, they start needing violations to justify their role. If everything is fine, if neighbors are responsible, if there's nothing to correct, then what are they in charge of? People like Dana don't just enforce rules. They subconsciously hunt for proof that they matter. And when the reality doesn't match the story they've written in their head about you, that cognitive dissonance hits hard. Sometimes hard enough to make someone physically buckle. All right, now let's go back to the garage floor. So there she was, Dana Caldwell, self-appointed guardian of Maple Ridge Aesthetics, sitting on my epoxy-coated floor like someone had just unplugged her operating system. The clipboard lay a few feet away. The garage lights hummed softly overhead. And for a second, it was just quiet. Not awkward quiet. Not tense quiet. Just reality settling in. I didn't rush to help her up. I didn't gloat either. I just stood there, arms folded, breathing steady, letting the moment breathe. Because this wasn't about humiliation. It was about boundaries. She finally looked up at me, eyes glassy, but not from emotion, from confusion. This isn't what I expected, she muttered. Yeah, that was the whole point. You expected clutter, I said calmly. You expected something you could cite. Her jaw tightened. That flicker of control came back for a second. The board has authority to ensure properties comply with community standards. From the outside, I replied. You crossed into private space. She tried to push herself up, but her heels slipped slightly on the polished surface. I stepped forward, not to help, just to close the distance enough so my voice didn't have to rise. Dana, you forced entry into my garage. Her eyes darted toward the side door. That's when I walked over and checked it. The latch plate was bent slightly inward. Not kicked in, but pushed hard enough, repeatedly, to override the catch. She hadn't stumbled into an unlocked door. She had committed. And here's the thing about people who operate on assumed authority. When they realize the ground beneath them isn't solid, they scramble. You left it unsecured, she insisted, her voice thinner now. No, I said quietly. You made it unsecured. She stood up finally, brushing imaginary dust off her slacks like that would restore dignity. Then she shifted tactics. This is where it got almost impressive. Well, she said, straightening her posture. Regardless of entry, the number of motor vehicles stored may still constitute improper use of space under subsection 8.4 regarding residential presentation. Subsection 8.4. I almost smiled. Not because she cited something, but because she cited it wrong. I walked over to my workbench drawer, pulled out a binder. Yes, I keep a binder. Every HOA document, every amendment, every architectural guideline revision. Tabbed, highlighted. Because I learned early on, if you're going to live under rules, know them better than the people quoting them. I flipped to section 8.4 and rotated the binder toward her. That subsection refers to exterior storage and visible commercial activity. Everything in here is enclosed, non-commercial, privately owned. She didn't even look at the page long. She knew. And here's where the tension shifted from confrontation to exposure. She wasn't enforcing anymore. She was reaching. You have neighbors who are uncomfortable, she said suddenly. That caught my attention. Which neighbors? She hesitated. Half a second. Too long. Concerns were raised, she said vaguely. Translation, no one complained. She assumed. Or worse, she projected. And that's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't even about control. It was about comparison. My garage was visible sometimes when I worked with the door open. People walking dogs would slow down, peek in, ask questions. Kids thought the motorcycles were cool. Husbands would linger a little too long. Dana's husband, Mark, had come by twice in the last year asking about the Mustang. I'd let him sit in it once. He'd looked like a kid. Suddenly the motive wasn't abstract anymore. You don't like that people admire it, I said, not accusatory, just factual. Her face hardened instantly. There it was. Not guilt. Not anger. Insecurity. This is not about admiration, she snapped. It's about maintaining standards. No, I said evenly. It's about you needing to feel above something. That landed. She grabbed her clipboard off the floor, clutched it to her chest like a shield. You will be hearing from the board. Good, I replied. So will they. And I meant it. After she left, stiff posture, controlled steps, no eye contact, I didn't cool off. I didn't sit and stew. I acted. I photographed the damaged door latch. I saved the security camera footage from the driveway angle that showed her entering without me present. Then I drafted an email. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Just facts. Timeline. Photos attached. From a legal standpoint, documentation is oxygen. Without it, it's just your word against someone with a clipboard. Within 24 hours, the HOA board responded. Not Dana. The actual board. The president, a retired CPA named Leonard, requested a meeting. That meeting happened 3 days later in the small clubhouse near the community pool. Dana was there, seated upright, hands folded tightly. Leonard opened with formality. We've reviewed the footage. That was it. That one sentence shifted the air in the room. He continued, the board does not authorize entry into enclosed private property without homeowner consent or emergency justification. This was a breach of protocol. Protocol. That word hit different when it wasn't coming from Dana. She attempted one last defense. The door appeared unsecured. Leonard adjusted his glasses. Even if that were the case, the proper response would have been written notice. Silence. Then came the part she didn't see coming. The board voted, unanimously, to suspend her from compliance oversight duties indefinitely. She could remain on the HOA as a member, but her inspection privileges were revoked. No more clipboards. No more solo enforcement. And just like that, the power evaporated. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like ours. Not because people are malicious. Because they're bored. By the end of the week, 3 neighbors had stopped by, respectfully, asking if I'd be open to showing the collection sometime. With permission. That word mattered now. I hosted a small open garage afternoon that Saturday. Nothing flashy. Lemonade on a folding table. Kids pointing at chrome. Adults asking restoration questions. It wasn't about showing off. It was about transparency. About taking something that had been framed as secretive and turning it communal on my terms. Dana didn't attend, but she watched from across the street. I saw her through the reflection on the Mustang side panel. Arms crossed. Still. And here's the cinematic irony. The very thing she tried to frame as disruptive ended up strengthening neighborhood cohesion. People connected. Conversations happened. Barriers dropped. After that day, she never stepped onto my driveway again. No more notes. No more inspections. And I upgraded my side door to a reinforced strike plate and installed an interior sensor. Not out of fear. Out of principle. Because boundaries, once tested, deserve reinforcement. All right. That's how the confrontation resolved. So what did I actually learn from all of this? besides the fact that epoxy floors are surprisingly comfortable when someone collapses on them. The lesson here is power without boundaries turns ordinary people into caricatures. Dana wasn't some comic book villain. She wasn't evil. She was someone who found identity in enforcement, and when enforcement became her personality, she started looking for problems to justify her role. That's where things get dangerous, not dramatic dangerous, but subtle dangerous. The kind that erodes trust in communities one clipboard at a time. From a legal perspective, this whole thing was simple. Property rights are not suggestions. HOA authority is contractual, not absolute. They operate within covenants you agreed to, nothing more. And if you don't read those covenants, if you don't understand the scope of enforcement, you unintentionally hand over more power than you ever signed for. A lot of homeowners lose conflicts not because they're wrong, but because they assume the board knows best. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they absolutely don't. According to standard procedure, transparency and written notice are foundational to HOA governance. When someone bypasses that and jumps straight into physical intrusion, they're not protecting the neighborhood, they're protecting their ego. And let's talk psychology for a second, because this part matters more than the legal stuff. This is a psychological trap. When you build your identity around control, you start interpreting independence as rebellion. My garage wasn't loud. It wasn't disruptive. It was simply mine. But to someone who equates order with dominance, autonomy can feel like defiance. That's the undercurrent most people miss. A lot of HOA conflicts aren't about paint colors or parking rules. They're about perceived status, about who gets to define normal, about whose lifestyle sets the tone. When someone steps outside that mold, whether it's through passion projects, landscaping choices, or just quiet self-sufficiency, it can trigger insecurity in people who rely on uniformity to feel stable. And here's something else I realized. I could have escalated. I could have embarrassed her publicly, posted the footage, turned it into neighborhood entertainment. But restraint is a different kind of strength. Boundaries enforced calmly are far more unsettling to an overreaching personality than rage ever will be. When I hosted that open garage afternoon, it wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about reframing the narrative. Secrecy invites suspicion. Transparency builds connection. I didn't know anyone at tour, but offering one changed the energy. Suddenly, the mysterious garage became Chris's restoration space. Labels matter. The lesson here is also about preparation. If you live in an HOA, read your documents. Not once, twice. Highlight them. Know where authority begins and ends. Because when conflict shows up, and it eventually does, confidence backed by knowledge shifts the balance immediately. There's a huge difference between saying, "I think you can't do that," and saying, "Section 8.4 doesn't apply to enclosed private property." That specificity changes everything. But maybe the biggest takeaway has nothing to do with HOAs. It's about passion. When you pour years into something, whether it's restoring vintage engines, building a garden, collecting art, whatever it is, you're going to encounter people who don't understand it. Some will admire it. Some will question it. A few will resent it. And occasionally, someone will try to control it. That's when you find out how solid your foundation really is. Because here's the truth. The garage wasn't what made Dana collapse. It was the realization that her assumption about me was wrong. She had already decided who I was. The messy bachelor. The rule bender. The guy probably hiding violations. And when reality contradicted that story, it cracked the image she relied on. Cognitive dissonance isn't just uncomfortable. It destabilizes identity. So if you're dealing with someone like that in your own neighborhood, workplace, family, even, ask yourself, are they reacting to what you're doing or to what your independence represents?